What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and today I want to talk about Solo, a Star Wars story, and specifically, what would I change about this movie to make it more like the movie I would have wanted from a Han Solo prequel film, right? Because if you have seen my review, you know that I really don't like this movie as it functions as a prequel. It's kind of a fun action movie, but it's not really a fun Han Solo movie, and I want to talk about what could have been done to make it better. With all that being said, I do want to give a spoiler warning for this film. I will be spoiling it from start to finish, so if you haven't seen it, get out now, as well as some minor spoilers for the original trilogy, which basically is what is going to inform me on who I think the character of Han Solo should be. So yeah, spoilers for Solo, a Star Wars story, as well as the original trilogy. Let's get into it. Okay, so I have three big issues when it comes to Solo, a Star Wars story, and how they portray the character of Han Solo. One, he's a bad pilot. Two, he's a bad smuggler. And three, he kind of has too much of a heart of gold. So let's talk about how I would fix some of those for this movie. In doing so, I do want to acknowledge that I am just one guy working in a vacuum and working with a already finished product that I can iterate on. That is very different from the creators of this movie, who were many people who had to work with actors, set locations, deadlines, and all other things to make the movie, which meant that they couldn't always get exactly what they wanted, even if they did have a good idea. As well as the fact that I know this movie was hampered by many, many production issues behind the scenes. So yeah, I'm not trying to say, I could have made a better Solo movie than them. I'm just trying to say this is what I would have liked out of a Solo movie, and why the Solo movie I did get doesn't fulfill my likes and wants. Okay? So I'm not trying to trash on the creators. I'm just trying to say this is what I would have wanted. All right. With that out of the way, let's talk about how we fix Han Solo, in my opinion. So, how do we show Han being a cooler pilot in this movie? I think the obvious solution is show him being a TIE fighter pilot. Start him out at the beginning of this movie in the Empire. We do not need to do a deep dive into his sad backstory on Corellia. One or two scenes on Corellia can set up that he had a hard life and that he had a girlfriend named Kira. And then he joins the Empire and, his life changes forever. Jump forward a couple years, and he's a TIE fighter pilot. And he's a TIE fighter pilot, right? That is so much cooler, in my opinion. Because the thing is, the opening action scene is just a speeder chase on Corellia, which is admittedly kind of cool, and they do some cool shots with it. But the problem is at the end of the day, it's just a glorified car chase. That's not unique to Star Wars. But you know what is unique to Star Wars? TIE fighters. Yes, space battles aren't exactly unique to Star Wars. Star Trek and half a dozen other movies have done cool space battles with dogfights and stuff like that. Okay, fine. But still, it would have been so much cooler, in my opinion, to show Han Solo in a TIE fighter tearing it up like a Top Gun Maverick of the Star Wars universe, rather than him in a speeder, right? You can't tell me that wouldn't be cooler. And to that end, it would have been cool if we got to flip the script, and instead of X-Wings versus TIE Fighters, we see TIE Fighters versus X-Wings. The difference being that the TIE Fighters now would have the named characters with faces that we could see, and we care about those guys. And the antagonists of this battle would be the X-Wings, right? I'd keep them faceless. They'd just be enemy ships, right? That would have been way cooler to see on screen. But instead, we didn't get that. We got a speeder chase. Because if you start off Solo as a TIE fighter pilot who's already had years of training, it doesn't feel cheap that he's a good pilot already. And I absolutely could believe, after a really cool scene where he outmaneuvers many X-Wings in his little TIE fighter, I could believe that those skills would transfer over to his abilities in the Millennium Falcon. That would make 10 times more sense. And speaking of the Millennium Falcon, I would not have Solo trash it on the one and only time he gets to fly it in this movie. Instead, with the Kessel Run, I'd have him maneuver the Millennium Falcon expertly around the various bits and bobs that he has to dodge out of the way, very akin to how well Han Solo dodged all of the asteroids in Star Wars Episode 5. Doesn't that just make more sense? And I do like the idea that we get to see the Millennium Falcon in its clean, pristine condition, and then we get to see it become battle damaged, or at least, rough around the edges and look like a piece of junk, right? And so what I would do is, instead of having Han Solo break that because he's a bad mechanic, but I'd have him break the ship, or at least take off a lot of the panels and stuff, because he's actually a really good mechanic, right? He's the equivalent of a car guy here, right? He doesn't care how the car looks. He just wants to get the most amount of performance out of it. So maybe he takes off the front little escape pod, or whatever they call that, the front of the ship, so that the ship can fly faster. Maybe he removes some of the panels so he can access some of the ship's innards a little bit easier, so that he can get the most performance out of it. Bypass some systems, change some things, add some bigger things in. I don't know, but I think it would have been cool if he was like maybe working on the Millennium Falcon while they were traveling to Kessel, so that they could make a quick getaway. And that would make a lot of sense. Plus, I think this is in line with Lando's character, where Lando is the type to just kind of buy a Ferrari or a Porsche and not care about modifying it or anything, because it's just like, well, it's a Porsche. It's cool. It drives fast. Whereas Han's the kind of guy where he's like, no, I know I can get more performance out of this. And that's what he does. And then they could still have their little banter and their arguments, where Lando's like, why are you tearing it up? And then Han's like, we need to get a quick getaway, and this is how to do it. That just makes so much more sense to me, and I like that so much more. And then it can explain why Han Solo really wants the Millennium Falcon, because he made all these modifications to it. He put all of this work into it. So yeah, he wants it back at the end. Instead, at the end of the actual film, Han Solo is just kind of like, oh, there's a connection between me and the Falcon. Trust me. And it's like, where? How? When was this shown? It doesn't make any sense. So that's how I make Han Solo a better pilot. Have him start out on the Empire, being a TIE Fighter pilot, and then have him make modifications to the Millennium Falcon, and then just dodge the Maw expertly, as well as the other debris in the Kessel Run, rather than having him crash and rip up the ship half a dozen times. That would be a better pilot. So now let's talk about how would I make him a better smuggler. So again, using the skeleton of the actual movie, I would change the actual movie, and so instead of him failing the train heist, I'd have him succeed. And the only change would be that the amount of coaxium fuel that they steal isn't this grand, large fortune. It's just much smaller. So it's still a good fortune. It still proves that he's a capable smuggler, but he's not, set for life, right? Then he goes to Dryden and he's like, hey, I want to be a smuggler. I want to make a ton of money and just live my life out in luxury the rest of my days. And Dryden's like, sure, but I don't trust you yet to be a full-on smuggler. One good job does not prove you to be this perfect, excellent guy. That makes a lot of sense. And so we show Han having to do the Kessel Run to prove his loyalty to Crimson Dawn. I like that a lot more. And then, if he succeeds on the Kessel Run and he succeeds on the train heist, I can believe that Han Solo is a really good smuggler compared to everyone else in the galaxy. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it sets him up to continue to being a good smuggler for the next 10 years, because this movie takes place 10 years before the events of New Hope, right? And so it sets him up to succeed, continuing forward. And then the one botched job with Jabba the Hutt really does become a fluke rather than what typically happens to Han Solo in these movies. Again, I'm really frustrated with what Disney did to Han Solo, but watch my video to learn all about that. But finally, to address the problem with Han having too much of a heart of gold, right? Because he saves Lando, he saves Chewie, he helps Tobias settle his debt with Dryden Voss. He's too nice in this film. I would instead change the movie dramatically to be a classic revenge story, right? This is an honor among thieves. It's not good versus bad. It's just, we were both bad guys. You betrayed me though, so now I want to get back at you. And because it's from the perspective of Solo, we end up siding with him and we end up caring about his character. That's it. And that would have been a 10 times better movie. And now the character development isn't Han getting jaded or anything like that, although you can kind of still have some of that, because I do like the femme fatale of Kira, and I do like the idea that she betrays him in the end, and that causes him to not trust people nearly as much. But rather, the character development for Han can be that he gives up on his revenge at the end of the movie. He gets close, but he doesn't quite do it, because instead he chooses to save Chewie, right? There's kind of a choice he has to make, and instead of killing the big bad evil guy, he instead chooses to save his friend Chewie, and so we get to see just a little hint of that heart of gold of, yeah, he is going to be a good guy in the end, But right now, he's not there yet. He still loves money more than most people. He still is going to swindle you out of deals and stuff. But he has a bit of that heart of gold because he does have a real friend in Chewbacca. So those are the big changes I would have liked to have seen in Solo: A Star Wars Story, and what I would have liked to have seen for a Han Solo movie. I would have liked it to be more of a classic revenge story. I would have liked to have seen Han be a good, competent smuggler. I would have liked him to work on the ship, work on the Millennium Falcon, and be a smart mechanic. I would have liked to have seen him be a cool pilot, both in the Millennium Falcon and in a TIE fighter. That's what I wanted from this film and what I didn't get. On top of all that, I just cut down on all the prequel tie-ins, right? I don't need to know how Han got his famous blaster. In fact, I wouldn't even have him hold the blaster in this movie, but maybe he gets it later. I wouldn't have an explanation for the Navi computer of the Millennium Falcon and the fact that you need to smack it. It's just a quirk of the ship. That's all we need to know. We don't need an explanation for every last little detail of this movie. But yeah. Anyway, those are some of the changes I would have liked to have seen for this film. But how would have it all worked together? How would this have made into one coherent story? Let's talk about that for a quick second. So I'd still start the movie on Corellia, hard life, Han and Kira, lovers, but instead Han would just choose to join the Empire. No big escape, nothing like that. And he does end up leaving Kira, but it's because he has to if he wants to become a pilot. They don't accept pilots if they're too old, and so he has to leave for the Empire and join the Academy now and not later. Works totally great. He's in the Empire, as we've already talked about. He'd be a hotshot pilot. He'd fight some X-Wings. He'd be the cool guy that does some really cool, crazy maneuvers. During this time, the Empire, and Han Solo specifically, would be working with Dryden Voss, probably because the Empire doesn't have enough manpower to police all the systems, so they use the Crime Lords to kind of keep some order, and in exchange, they give the Crime Lords a bunch of money. I think that works. I think that makes sense. And so the reason this is important is Dryden Voss would betray Solo and kind of get him kicked out of the Empire. Left to his own devices, Solo determines, I need to become a smuggler because that's the best way to make money and to live rich. I think that works, and I think that sets Han's character up for the future. However, before Han can become a smuggler, I would say that the way Voss betrayed Han Solo ended up making Han Solo look bad in front of the Imperials, so the Imperials throw Han in a prison. I think a prison is more interesting than sending him to the front lines, but that's just my opinion. Anywho, in prison he meets both Chewie and Tobias Beckett, like he does when he meets them on the front lines. However, in this case, Chewie isn't some man-eating monster that they feed people to, and Beckett is not working for Voss. He actually was also betrayed by Voss, and he wants to get back at Voss. He and Han team up, and they determine that with a Wookiee's help, they are able to break out of prison, as well as one other character, and that is Kira. So I'd bring Kira back into the story at this moment. She is working for the Empire as a communications officer. Secretly, she's working for Dryden Voss, and she was the one who arranged it so that Han Solo and Tobias Beckett would get put in the same prison. She didn't know it was Han Solo at the time. She just knew it was an enemy to Voss, and so she made sure they're in the same prison so she can keep an eye on them. But as a communications officer of the prison, she hears the occasional tidbit of information that Voss is then able to exploit and steal from the Empire. And still be a criminal. I think it makes sense that Voss would be both in league with the Empire but also stealing from them behind their backs. I don't know. He's an evil crime lord. It works. But anywho, with the help of Kira and Chewie, Han and Tobias are able to escape. They all go after Dryden Voss. Kira pretends to know nothing, but actually she secretly does know more than she lets on. They do the train robbery first because that's the last bit of information Kira has from the Empire. They succeed at that. Then they use the money to buy transport of the Millennium Falcon. Han makes the upgrades to the Millennium Falcon that he needs to. This bothers Lando, but he's getting paid enough that he doesn't care. Han also pays for some extra parts maybe for the Millennium Falcon to, soup it up. I don't know. Either way, it's still not a large fortune. It's just a small fortune. And they go to Kessel to get some information this time instead of fuel, right? So this time they still do the Kessel run, but instead of Kessel being owned by the Pike Syndicate, I would have it be owned by Crimson Dawn. And this is what allows our intrepid heroes or maybe they're not that heroic, but are smugglers, to find the location of Dryden Voss. They go to Kessel because it's owned by Voss, and then they're able to find his location and take him. At this point, after they make the Kessel Run, they have to get out of there fast. Maybe they're being chased by some of the Crimson Dawn soldiers or police force or whatever on Kessel. They make it out of the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs. Yay! They go to Dryden Voss's yacht location, but they get captured. And why do they get captured? Because Kira betrays them. And this really hurts Han. And Lando and Chewie are taken below. Tobias and Han are taken above to meet with Voss because, of course, Voss doesn't know or care about Lando Calrissian or Chewbacca. I forgot to mention that on Kessel, Chewie would still save Han's life, but I would make this a bigger moment where Han looks at Chewie in a whole new way and appreciates him because it's like, oh, you just saved my life and you really didn't have to. I feel like that makes a lot more sense, and it was already there kind of in the actual movie, but I feel like highlighting it would have made it a better scene and made a lot more reason why Han would stick with Chewie. Right. Moving back to the final confrontation, I would have the yacht be docked with the Millennium Falcon. It's currently taken over by Crimson Dawn agents. Han Solo and Tobias Beckett are confronting Kira and Dryden Voss. And then I'd have Chewie and Lando captured below decks. Right. And so at this point, Voss orders the execution of Chewbacca, and he also explains to Beckett why Beckett should hate Han Solo. So here's the backstory. Right? The backstory is Beckett and Val had some information on the Empire and how to steal a large sum of money from them, or maybe the coaxium fuel, or whatever MacGuffin you want to put it in there, right? But they didn't have the power to do it alone, so they teamed up with Dryden Voss to try and pull off this job, right? But they got caught by the Empire. Someone in the Empire got wind of this and betrayed them. Or turned them in, you could say. Voss played innocent and threw Tobias Beckett under the bus. Maybe in the process he ended up killing Val. And this really angers Tobias Beckett because that's his girlfriend and he lost out on all this money and now he's in an Imperial prison. So that's how he got to where he was. But the Imperial who discovered this plot, who realized all of this, was none other than Han Solo. So that's why Dryden Voss hates Han Solo and have a reason to betray him and get him thrown into prison. But now Beckett has a reason to kind of hate Han Solo as well because he sees him as equally guilty in the death of Val as Dryden Voss. And I like that this reveal happens, and so now Han Solo has no one he can trust. Kira betrayed him, Beckett wants to kill him, Voss wants to kill him. It's a problem. But at this point is where we have another plot twist. Kira turns on Voss because, of course, she wants to become the next Crimson Dawn, like in the actual film. Voss and Kira run off to another room, and Han Solo chooses to go save Chewbacca. But first, he's confronted by Beckett. He shoots first, like in the actual movie. Great scene. He goes below decks. He saves Lando. He saves Chewie. Maybe Lando and Chewbacca question him about not going after Voss or whether he killed him or not, showing off that little bit of heart of gold of, yeah, Han Solo's still a good guy. At heart, he doesn't choose revenge over his friends. But in the end, they get the Millennium Falcon and ride away, and I think that would work really, really well. Finishing up, Kira would successfully kill Dryden Voss. She would become the next Crimson Dawn, and she would deal with Darth Maul, I guess. Yay. We can have that tie-in still. And then with Solo, I would have... He still wins the bet for the Millennium Falcon against Lando Calrissian, and it makes a lot more sense now since he put so much work into the ship. He and Chewie are best friends cemented because Chewie saw Han save his life instead of go after his revenge quest. So it all works out really, really nicely. So that's one possible way you could have made this movie, and it would have been a better Han Solo prequel, in my opinion. It's not perfect. It has its issues. There's still things to work out, but it's a rough pitch for how that movie could have worked out using the existing skeleton of Solo: A Star Wars Story. I do want to emphasize I am working in a vacuum. I am not creating something from nothing, which is way harder. So I do want to give credit to the creators of Solo: A Star Wars Story. I know that was a tough job to do, but I am still disappointed with the choices they made regarding the character of Han Solo, and I outlined in this video some of the ways those choices could have been better in order to make a better movie, in my opinion.